So just to start, first of all, thank you so much, Professor Beckman, for joining us. Just kind of like a little bit of background, I took two classes with Professor Beckman. She is next level, and I learned so much from her in terms of product management and specifically how to conduct customer interviews. And I'm so fortunate because it helped me so much to create incredible products. And we're so fortunate to have Professor Beckman here for 30 minutes to give us the highlights and share her wisdom with us. So thank you so much again for taking the time. We sincerely appreciate that. And the stage is yours. So thank you so much again.
Thank you, Almag, and welcome everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you. I've warned Almag that learning to interview customers in 30 minutes is perhaps a bit of a fool's errand, but I'll do the best I can to kind of give you a quick view of the highlights of what matters when you're doing this work. Okay, you spotlighted my video, so now I can't see any of you, I think. But okay, so what I wanted to do is just to start really with a quick video, and I don't think I'm able to see chat now either. But anyway, I would love to get your reactions to what you see going on in this video.
What if we could make a change in the lives of children with cancer right now?
I was told that, I'm sorry, your daughter had cancer, and I was just in total shock.
Everything's really new in the beginning. They have no idea what to expect.
Each year, more than 15,000 kids are diagnosed with cancer in the US, and the average length of treatment is 1,000 days. And so we thought about the need for emotional comfort for these children. And now we have the opportunity to bring the latest in social robotics into the field of medicine, bringing comfort and joy through this daunting process.
Oh, that's awesome. What we try to do here is to give children the tools to understand what's going on and to empower them.
For our family and for Wyatt, the best use would be to help him communicate and a friend to comfort him when he's having treatment.
Play is natural to a child. Play is really how they learn and how they process.
So we leveraged play and some of the latest technology to create healthcare tools for kids with illness. Everybody knows the Aflac duck. We wanted to bring the Aflac duck to life into a caring companion for children with cancer. It responds and moves in a lifelike and natural way. They could feed their ducks, bathe their ducks, and when you tap these different cards to the duck's chest, it behaves with that feeling to help children communicate their feelings. By the time the duck is shipping, we will have spent 18 months designing, testing, and iterating with hundreds of families, doctors, and experts.
Hi, Levi.
What do you think the duck is doing?
Singing.
Duck is singing.
Yes.
First and foremost, the duck is a constant companion for children throughout their treatment journey.
He's kind of cute.
He's kind of cute.
Candy's going to do some breathing, and we're going to kind of match her breathing.
Just a
Tiny bit faster.
Perhaps most important of all, the ducks can share in the patient's experience.
Okay, actually, wonderful. Good job. Yeah, look at this. Pack is also getting one.
Can I try?
Yeah.
What?
I think it's so awesome. You just feel comfort, with something like that.
I really like the Aflac duck to be your friend, to help you get through all your tough times here.
I think the duck has the potential to have a huge impact on our patients, our families, and our healthcare program as a whole.
So technically y'all want to make it happen to give everybody one or something?
That's the goal.
If she has something to sit with her, something that can take her through it. A friend that will always be there. And that would help a lot of kids.
So I want to pause for just a moment and ask you what you saw going on there. How were the Sproutel founders learning about their customers. And you're welcome to put in the chat or just unmute and pop in here. There's a whole bunch of different things going on in that video, which is why I love it. But what do you see happening?
The big thing seems to be that they're talking. Sorry,
who's that?
Andrew.
Andrew.
Yeah, sorry. I think the big thing is that they're going and taking it to the customers and seeing what they think. Sort of really trying to understand personally from the customers how they respond. So it's not just a survey; it's really seeing that emotion and feeling that emotion as well.
And who are the customers in this case?
So it's both the children and the parents, really. I think the parents get such a sense of like, we're doing a good thing for our child and this is something that's helping, so therefore we want to spend on it. But also obviously the children, they're getting that comfort and that sort of that feeling of support.
So for sure, I've got both children and parents. Are there other key stakeholders? And we don't have to put this all on Andrew, by the way.
Hopefully the
There's the hospital itself. No, there's the doctors,
Yeah.
the nurses, the administrators of the hospital. So they're testing all three of those, right? The little boy getting his shot. They're not just testing whether it's comfort for him, but they were also testing whether it works to be having the duck there while they're administering care, right? And I don't know how they ended up funding this, but you can also imagine that they're not asking, well, we all pay in the long run, don't we? But they're not asking the parents or the kids necessarily to pay outright. Could be insurance agencies, could be the hospital, could be a grant organization. So this actually there's a complex set of stakeholders here. And while the video kind of anchors around the kids, they're really testing this across the board and trying to engage all the other stakeholders as they go along, right? So yeah, Shrina, they're trying to understand. They know their first product. They've won the Consumer Electronics Show with every product they've introduced. This is a company called Sproutel. Their first product was Jerry the Bear for kids with diabetes. Second product was the Aflac duck. By the way, why Aflac? Somebody almost always asks me that. If you're a startup, what do you think Aflac offered them?
Money.
Right? I mean, the obvious one is funding to fund the startup. And what else did they get access to? You watched it in the whole video. A customer base, right? They had access for 18 months to an environment where they could go in and really be testing the product and trying to figure it out. So they knew about kids in play from Jerry the Bear, and they knew kids in comfort from their Jerry the Bear work as well. So part of what you see happening here is they're moving beyond that. They introduced that in the early part of the video. We understand kids play and that. So they had the sort of bigger kid context, but then they were trying to figure out how was this going to work in this particular environment, right? Jerry the Bear was a home product, whereas this one is used in the hospital setting. So they had to really understand that setting and how it could leverage the same stuff that they had with Jerry the Bear, but bring it into a different setting. Their third product, by the way, is called Purble, and it you can look it up. It's to reduce anxiety. So it's a little pet that you calm it and it calms you. So they've been super successful, which is very fun. But that's also why I like this example. First of all, it's really hard to get good video of people doing real work with customers. Secondly, it shows you all the different levels of prototyping they did, from the little discs and how they communicate emotion, to the breathing, to testing whether or not it works in the hospital setting. So you could see the use of prototypes as it went through the process as well. So I just wanted to use that to kind of set you up to think more broadly about how do we go about learning about customers and users. So this is going to be a bit of a fire hose in 15 minutes, but Almog doesn't yet, but I'll give him the slides, so you'll have all of these. So I'm just going to kind of really quickly go through with a focus on interviewing, but I wanted you to see the video because there's lots of different ways to learn about customers and users. So what we're trying to do, and please throw questions or comments in the chat. I'm very happy to interact there as we go through this. So what am I trying to do with these interviews? I'm trying to establish both cognitive and emotional empathy with the customers. Cognitive empathy, understanding how they think. So that could be the procurement officer at the cancer center. How do they make decisions? How do they decide what to buy? How do they figure out the financing of it, right? So cognitive connection as well as emotional connections. How do the kids and parents feel by having this duck in their presence? And what anchors this is this notion that people make sense to themselves. So you might see somebody doing something strange. You're all in Berkeley. People do strange things there all day. And instead of saying that was weird, you have to say to yourself, I wonder why they did that. And that's at the heart of what we're trying to do with this kind of research. So this notion of watching people eat while you're eating, which if you don't know what it is, you can look that up. It's a thing. But a lot of people are like, why would they do that? So understanding why people do what they do is what we're trying to do. There's all kinds of ways of doing this research, participant and non-participant observation. I worked with a fast food company to help them figure out how to train people who worked in their stores. Participant observation would be, I get trained to make a milkshake. Non-participant observation would be, I watch people get trained to make a milkshake. So observation is super core. There are entire classes that you could teach on observation, right? Yeah, parasocial things, right? Exactly, fine. So observation in and of itself is the thing that we could teach a whole hour class on. In short, pay attention to the world around you. Put your phone away. When you're walking across campus, look at what's happening around you. Observation is really critical, and you could see that they were doing some of that. Informant diaries, also super helpful. They're particularly helpful in more B2B settings, where you might want to have somebody track an activity over the course of a day or a week or a month. So you give them a diary, have them collect things, take pictures of it, and then they unpack all of that when they meet with you. Part of the reason we do that is because humans have a low recall. We remember things differently than they actually are, and we have a low say-do ratio. So if you ask me how I think about eating, I would tell you, oh, of course, I have fruit and vegetables every day. But if you ask me about specifics, or you ask me to keep an informant diary, you might find something very different than that. So diaries are a very helpful way of getting data. And what I want to focus on here is this notion of ethnographic interviewing. Let me quickly say that ethnographic interviews are not the same as expert interviews. So if I'm doing a project on homelessness, I might go interview the people who run the homeless center in Berkeley. How many people do you see? So I'm talking to them as an expert in it. If I'm going to do ethnographic research, I might either talk to the homeless, the unhoused themselves, or I might talk to the person who runs that center about their personal experience of running that center. So ethnographic interviews are about learning about the lived experience of another person, not their broad generalizations about homelessness is bad, or no, it's about the lived experience of that person. So this is a big difference. A lot of you are used to expert interviews, and my experience is when people turn interview guides into me, I see a lot of expert interviewing going on, and I want you to really think about, who would I like to learn about, and how can I best learn about them? So an ethnographic interview is an extended, open-ended conversation exploring needs, emotions, aspirations by getting the other person to tell you stories. This is really important as well. So you want them to tell you stories about their lived experiences. So the interviewee should do 90% of the talking. This is the other way in which this is different. We're used to having to and fro conversations that are sort of 50-50 or something in that. In this case, you're talking 10% of the time. Oh, that's really interesting. Could you tell me more about this part? And letting the person talk. And the other huge mindset shift here is that this is more than just gathering data. You have to be open to hearing something that's different than what you thought, and that ultimately changes how you think about the problem that you're working on. So a very, very different setup. This was part of that fast food project, and the woman on the right in the white shirt, it's her first day, and you can see that she's utterly terrified. She needs this job. She helps support her family with this job, and it's lunch rush, and she's lost. So making those kinds of observations and then talking with her later and kind of understanding, whoa, this training maybe could be better if somebody's looking that terrified on their first day of work. So again, I'm going to emphasize this because it's really important. At the heart of this work is getting people to tell you a story. Walk me through the first thing that you were trained to do in this fast food place, right? Walk me through your child's cancer treatment from when they were first diagnosed to today. So having people tell you stories about their lives with a frame that's big enough, and I'll talk about that in a moment, that you can really learn something is super important. So if you leave with nothing else, think about this as a way to get people to tell you stories. So what does this look like? I'm going to talk in a moment because this is really important. You need to set up the interview. I teach a lot of MBAs and executives who come from a lot of different companies. They tend to set up the interview by saying, we have a new product and we want to make sure you'll like it. And I'm paraphrasing, but that's more or less what they say. I don't want you to say that, right? So I want to learn about what it's like to have a child with cancer, right? Not about, would you like my duck? Now, as I go through the process, I'm going to get to, do you like my duck? But in the beginning, I'm really trying to understand what is the problem that I'm trying to solve here. So I'm going to set up the interview very carefully. I've never done your job, and I just love to learn what it's like to do your job, right? So I'm setting it up. I'm going to spend half an hour with you. By the way, if you ask for half an hour, always put an hour on your calendar so that at half an hour, you don't have to say, whoa, this is really interesting, but I got to go now. It's always better. If you are good at interviewing, they'll want to keep talking, right? So leave space for that. Then you can kick it off. It's nice to kick it off. I did this exercise with some execs the other day, and it was a gift giving. They were interviewing each other about gift giving. And they started, who's the most important person you give a gift to? Whoa, that's like really hard question to start with. So starting with questions that are still on topic, but are easier for people to answer. It could be their background. Sometimes it's really helpful to know in a B2B setting, you know, where have they worked at different companies? What different kinds of jobs have they had? Because later you can use that to say, oh, well, you said you'd done procurement at this other company as well. How is it the same or different than doing procurement here? So the kickoff, the whole intent of it is to make people comfortable. Because when you get to the grand tour, then you want to take a deep dive, right? Who's the most important person you give gifts to might fit there, right? After you've gotten some trust built up. And I'm going to go through some grand tour questions just to give you a sense of what those look like. And then this is like a story arc, right? There's the climax, and then there's the denouement, right? So I'm gonna do some reflection. Gee, what I think I've heard you say is that you really dislike giving gifts to your spouse or partner, which is very common, right? And you know, is that right? And then let people reflect on, yeah, you know, it's so hard, whereas it's so easy to give them in this other circumstance. So reflection, Huggies pull-ups came about because the interviewers stayed with the parents long enough to have them say, oh, but can I tell you, my neighbor comes over and says, oh, is your kid still in diapers? Right? Mine is potty trained. Like that reflection, it's the end of therapy hour, 50 minutes are up, and then you say, wait a second, my partner left me this week. So you want to stay present for that moment, right? And then wrap things up. So setting up the interview, this is so important, and I see this done poorly a lot of the time. Instead of saying, I'm a competitor for Zoom and I want to make the best video conference app ever, say, I'm studying how colleagues connect productively online. Or instead of, I'm making this cool new feature for my widget, I'm here to learn about your challenge in whatever space, right? Or instead of, we're innovating a new product in sector Y, I'm here to learn about your experience with Y, right? The good, bad, and the ugly. So it's really important. The frame you bring to the interview determines what you will hear in the interview. So if you walk in and you say, I want to learn about whether you like this or not, then that's all I'm going to hear, right? I'm not going to hear, how do I communicate, or how do I use the phone in my daily life, or right? So put a frame around the problem. You all have projects, and you've been given challenge areas, which may not be how the customers or stakeholders for those organizations see it, right? Exactly, Miguel. They'll tell you what you want to hear, and you don't want that. You really want to be able to hear something that you didn't want to hear, right? So you got to break that that frame when you're doing this kind of work. Come on. There we go. So I don't want to spend a lot of time on these. I just wanted to give you, there's 3 pages of these, and these hopefully will be helpful to you. But things like walk me through a typical day, get specific examples, right? Exhaustive lists are fine. Peer comparisons, do other CIOs think the same way as you do about procuring software? Since COVID, what's different than a year ago is super helpful, because everything is different than it was. So these are examples. I'm not going to spend time on the next 2 pages. They'll be in the document that Alma gives you. Things like task and organization structures, have them draw pictures to bring it alive. There are also 101 Design Methods is a good book. You can also just Google interviewing methods. But a friend of mine did a project for Lyft Bar, and he, trying to see the chat and you, and he just bought a bunch of foods, and he had people sort them and then tell him what the categories were, right? So there's energy bars, performance fuel, snacks. So I just had one of those students in the EMBA program works for SF Opera, and he wanted to know what people do with their leisure time. So he just made a bunch of pictures of things you could do in your leisure time, and he had people sort them. And it was so helpful to find out how people think about what to do on their weekends. And then this also, my friend who did this work, at the end, he asked people, if you got a year supply, what would you choose? And they really did get a year supply of foods. So this, people, if I say, are you willing to pay $5 for this? You'd probably go, oh, yeah, sure. That's really different than actually paying for it. So trying to get people to actually make a decision is really helpful. So here's a couple of thoughts. By the way, 10 to 12 customer interviews. If you're looking for themes across the interviews, identify 90% of user needs. So 10 to 12 90-minute interviews is better than 10 to 12 focus groups. They're less expensive, they're more intense, and they get you better data. So usually I do the class, I have people try to draw a journey map, try to do a web of abstraction. Both of those are ways of framing and reframing the problem that you're tackling. And then with that under your belt, like playing around with the context, systems mapping works, then just mind map. What do I want to learn from my customer or stakeholder, any stakeholder? And then what questions would I add to that mind map? So this is a way to just kind of particularly with your team, what's all the stuff we want to learn if we had a chance to talk to someone on Monday morning? And then you can craft an interview guide. And this is the template we use in the product management program. And I've also put in here a whole bunch of stuff about probing questions, because I find that the interview guide could be like 3 to 5 primary questions. And some people will not finish talking about one of those questions in 30 minutes, and that's fine. Other times people will kind of just, oh yeah, well, I eat vegetables on Friday, in which case I need probing questions. And these are just some hints. We're not always, this, by the way, works at home, it works with your friends. Say what you mean by, or when you say, this is classic. I watch people do this all the time. This guy responding to the most important person, he said, well, I hope my wife isn't listening, but my most important person is my 6-year-old son. And I'm like, oh my gosh, he has just opened the door for you to have an amazing conversation about your wife versus your son and gift giving. Don't miss those prompts, or don't assume when somebody says lunch is lunch, that you understand what it is that they mean. And that's really hard because you're all really smart people who know a lot about what you're doing, but sinking into somebody else's life and being curious about it is important. So there are 3 pages in here of yes, oh, totally, Miguel. Miguel, it sounds like you should be teaching this class. You can coach everybody, right? Silence is golden. So I watch people turn a question into multiple choice question all the time. What do you like to do when you travel? Do you like to go to games? Do you like to? No, let them tell you what they like to do when they travel. So I hope there's a lot of stuff in the slides. I did not even intend to go through it. I put it there so you would have it as a handout. I hope that the grand tour questions are helpful to you in thinking about, how am I going to get stories out of my customers? And I hope the probing questions are helpful in case you're nervous about what if they don't answer, or how do I really sink into actively listening and encouraging others to share their stories with me. So I've always liked this quote from Tom Kelly at IDEO. Pay attention to how people might like to interact with you and the solutions you're offering. A remarkable change takes place. You can do more than satisfy their immediate needs. You might actually make them feel like heroes. And I think holding that frame of, if I wanted to make this person feel like a hero, what do I need to know about them in order to be able to do that? And just imposing on them whatever your client has said you should impose on them might not be the way to make them feel like heroes. So I'm going to leave it at that. We are 1 minute over time along. I'm happy to stay and bounce things around if people have questions, but I know it's the promised quitting time.
I have a question.
Thank you for your contributions, Miguel. It's that's the fastest I've ever tried to teach ethnographic interviewing. But I'm happy to hear from any of you if you want to send an interview guide. Oh, a couple of hints along those lines. I've been playing around with ChatGPT to do some of this work, and I have fed student designed interview guides to ChatGPT and said, how might you, I can't remember the exact prompt, but something like, how would you improve this interview guide? That might be enough, but it's better if you say, how might you improve this interview guide to learn more about person X in context Y? You can also just ask, please don't substitute ChatGPT for an interview, but it can set you up really nicely for it. Tell me about the day in the life. I've done this with a small boutique owner, entire list, right, of the stuff they do. Or tell me about the desired outcomes of a small boutique owner, a whole other list. And that's super helpful for you in thinking, oh, wait a second, I'm only helping them with one desired outcome. How does that interact with the other 5 that they really care about? And how do I begin to think about those dynamics? So ChatGPT can be your friend, but it doesn't know, like if you ask it about a specific boutique owner in Oakland or something, it'll tell you, I don't know. And it doesn't get to the nuance of what's going on in people's lives. But it can help you a lot to go into an interview feeling more comfortable that you have some context, and it can also help you with interview questions. So don't be afraid to have it help you. I think where I went with that is I'm happy to look at interview guides as well if you want to send them to me. But I don't know that I'm any better than ChatGPT at this point. But yeah, frame it well. Frame it well so that you ask good questions.
So I think in most scenarios, kind of like you mentioned, like you are coming in with a specific kind of idea or product that would interact with their existing like lives or experiences. And so I think the framework that you laid out makes a lot of sense in terms of like learning about their lived experience and how they do things and their challenges or things to learn about that kind of stuff. At what point and how do you introduce like the change or like your idea or concept into the description to see what they think about it?
So here's what you want to think about is the difference between learning and selling. And so what we often do when we have a product is we in our heads, we're there to sell it.
Right.
I just want you to like it, right? So a couple of ways to think about that. If you're testing a solution, then you might want to go all the way to structuring the interview as a test. But it's way better if you have more than one option for people to play with, right? Now, it might be helpful to you to have some context before you do the test. So how do you comfort children in a hospital today? Right? Before I say, so you learn a little bit about their particular environment, and then you can kind of build on that. The worst of all worlds is when you interview people for, half an hour, and then you go, okay, here's my answer. And the person goes, why'd you just waste half an hour of my time? Right? If you already thought you had the answer. So you don't want to do that. So you have to transition carefully to an answer. And it's better, in my mind, if you have two versions of that so that people feel like they can say, oh, well, I don't like this, but I do like that. So they can feel like they are being invited to co-design with you, as opposed to thinking that you were just being polite, as opposed to really interested in learning from them. Does that make sense, Harry?
Yeah, that makes sense. Because I think the most direct way that comes to me is like having the conversation about like their experience and then saying like, okay, well, here's an idea that I've been having. What do you think about it? Which is, I feel like not the right way to approach it, right? But I'm like not sure how to like that transition. I think this is the very like nuanced part that I'm struggling with.
Yeah,
more, so.
I think it's worth thinking about it, right? And don't lie to the people, right? But the problem is if you kept too zeroed in on the product, you miss something like, oh, well, the remote control on this doesn't work with the remote control on that. So I would never use those together, right? And you're so busy on your product that you don't hear the remote control problem. That was a dumb example, but contextually making sure you're understanding before you start saying, I have the answer. Then you can even say things like, this has been really interesting. I had no idea that X was, connected to Y in your life. And now I'm not sure, like I've been playing with this idea, but I'm not sure it'll really work with Y. Right. So you're not like, okay, thanks. and then pivoting, you're really listening to them. And then saying, even critiquing the idea before you get there, like, because you've listened to them say, I don't know if this will work, right? Yeah. So be careful about it, right? That's all. If you've built up trust in that half hour and you've really gotten them to talk about things, and then you just pivot into, you know, kind of in a sense, just like, okay, fine. Yeah, then they don't feel, and you want to build up trust because you want to come back to them with the next iteration of the prototype, right? So that's another way to think about it, is to sort of say, I'm going to do a learning interview, and then I'm going to come back with the prototypes, so that you're not making them sort of think the whole time you were there to sell them something.
Makes a lot of sense. Thanks.
Yeah. It's hard when you're working for clients because they've given you a frame that may or may not be the right frame for what they should be doing. And so you've got both the problem of, I want to really learn from people, but then you also have to sell what you learned back to the client. And that, you know, I don't know how you all think about that. My experience is that a lot of the MBA students I've worked with in classes that do this in the past, in a way, aren't brave enough to say to the client, you aren't framing the problem in the right way. And I'm being blunt, you have to say that much more nicely, but really not being afraid to say, you know, I think there's a bigger problem that people are having out there that you could serve in a different or better way. So practicing that a little bit is not a bad thing.
So on behalf of all the students in the squad, first of all, thank you so much, Professor Beckman, for taking the time with us. I learned so much. And again, I also took 2 classes with you. And
You've already seen all this, Almag.
I'm always learning from you, but you know, just from my end, I learned so much. And it's all about the stories, right? It's always having this kind of like beginner mindset. Don't assume that you know everything. In fact, we don't know most of the things. So again, really appreciate your time. And
My pleasure.
And I will for sure share the presentation with the students. So again, thank you so much for your time. Wish you a
My
wonderful.
pleasure. And I'll send you the deck right now. So,
Really
well, good
appreciate
luck with your projects. They looked really interesting. So have fun with them.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. That was helpful.
Bye-bye.
Bye.